What was your scariest, something's not right, moment? Not me, but my brother was walking home when he was about 7 or 8 and a man pulled up demanding to take my brother to the hospital because he was limping and was starting to push him into the car. He had foot surgery previously. Our neighbor, whose kids we used to play with, suspected something was up and yelled at the men and took my brother inside her house. The police didn't catch the guy and years later come to find out the guy and his car matched the description of the men who kidnapped Stephen Stainer a short time later, which was a famous incident in our parts. Life could have been very different if our neighbor hadn't been paying attention. Was that the dude who stole a kid and kept him until he abducted another kid, who he saved? Wasn't his brother a serial killer too? Or am I mixing people up? I was walking to school in middle school and this lady with a car pulled over next to me and called me Linda. That's not my name, but was close enough. I looked up. She apologized and explained she thought I was her grandkid. Then she offered me a ride to school. Except that I was already standing on the school grounds. I had a half-block walk before I needed to turn to walk into the building. When I said no, she tried to demand I get into the car. I said no thanks and took off running. It occurred to me much later that she probably had no intention of dropping me off at school. A very similar thing happened to me. Guy stopped and offered me a ride. I got in the car because he reminded me of somebody I knew, but I wasn't sure who. It was a small town, so everybody kinda knew each other. Turns out he wasn't who I thought and I also wasn't who he thought. He only offered the ride because he mistook me for his nephew. We were both tall, skinny, and curly blonde hair. I actually knew the kid. Funny stuff. I was 14 at the time and even though things turned out alright, I knew I fucked up the moment I realized he was actually a stranger. This is the most wholesome ending that could have possibly happened. He probably felt like such a creep for picking up a random kid. LMAO. Oh crap, I might be getting kidnapped. Oh crap, I might be accidentally kidnapping. I was working on a radio system in the local water tower of a pretty remote outback town. It was a beautiful late spring day in October when I got there, but after about 2 hours the bird noises stopped, the breeze stopped. I took my equipment out of standby and flagged it as live test because I had the weirdest feeling I didn't have time to fully test it and went outside to sit in the car. About 90 seconds later there was a direct lightning strike on the tower I'd just left. It was the highest point in 200 kilometers. It was literally the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Ever. I remember reading somewhere that you can feel the static in the air before a lightning strike. Do you recall feeling your hairs stand? I was in a car that got hit once. I was parked watching the storm roll in across the lake. A few seconds before the hit my hair stood on end and I got a metallic taste in my mouth. Then everything was very bright and loud. No damage to the car surprisingly. I planned to visit my dad in the afternoon. Called him in the morning to ask if he needed anything because I was about to go to the store anyway and could easily pick up some things for him. He didn't answer. A little weird for him but not too uncommon. But I had that thought in the back of my head. So I tried again like 30 minutes later. Again, nothing. Neither landline or mobile. So I decided to drive over there early and check. Can't really explain it but I just knew that something had happened. Found him dead in his house. He fell and cracked his head open. To this day I don't actually know what was worse, finding him like this or the 30-minute long drive where the feeling grew that I was going to walk into something like that. Similar story with my mom. She died in her sleep at least, but when she didn't answer within the hour about a question regarding babysitting my daughter I knew she was at best in a bad way. Luckily since she had her doors locked and her Charlie bar down I couldn't get in and it was the police and firefighters who had to tell me. I'm glad I didn't see her body. That drive is weird. Not too similar but the same eerie feeling with my dad. All day felt weird, wrong. My mother even texted me while I was at work saying something felt bad. My sister texted my mom earlier saying something was odd. A few hours later my mom found my dad dead. He died in his sleep from heart issues. Coincidentally the cat threw up on my mom's stuff which she never does, we think. At the time he actually passed the way the timeline plays out. During the UK's first lockdown I hadn't seen my dad who lived on his own for 3 months, but we spoke on the phone every day religiously. One night whilst I was drifting off to sleep at 2 a.m. I suddenly started feeling overwhelming anxiety, sweating and just feeling like something was off. I could not get back to sleep due to worry, so I decided to ring my night owl dad, as I knew he'd be up and answer the phone, but to my surprise, no answer. I woke my partner and told him something was really off, and my dad hadn't answered his phone, which had my anxiety running tenfold at this point. He suggested if he still hadn't answered the phone in the morning, we would drive over and check on him. However, I could not shake this feeling, so at 3 a.m. my partner and I got in the car and drove 3 hours to my dad's home. When we arrived at my dad's house, I walked in to find my dad staring at the wall, gray/yellow in color, slurring his words and utterly confused about where he was. I immediately phoned an ambulance, and he spent the next 4 weeks in hospital with acute kidney failure from undiagnosed end-stage liver cirrhosis. I'll never forget the doctor telling me if I had arrived at his home a few hours later, I would have been calling an undertaker and not an ambulance. Due to the sudden and random confusion caused by cirrhosis, he genuinely believed the TV remote was his phone, hence why he couldn't seek treatment. Kidney failure comes on so rapidly that the two together are fatal within hours, so me turning up that morning was crucial to him getting the treatment at the right time. As I'm typing this, my dad is driving over to my house to spend the Christmas here with us, and the cirrhosis symptoms remain under control, a happy ending. Sometimes anxiety can be a life-saving gift. Edit. While I am humbled by your support and awards, thank you so much. A bit more context for extra feels. I lost my mom and stepdad 6 months before this took place, so my dad is my rock, and I'm extra grateful for every day he is healthy and happy. Even though his cirrhosis is not going away, we still have time on our side, smiley face. I was living about 5 hours away from my parents and spent Easter with them. The plan was to take Monday off work and drive back that day, but for some reason, I decided to go back on Sunday night. Woke up about 3 to a weird noise and hit the touch lamp next to my bed. It made a loud popping sound and turned off. Thinking something isn't right here, I got up and grabbed the bedroom door handle. It was so hot that I immediately pulled my hand back. As it turned out, my entire apartment was in flames. My living room caught fire from a faulty electric outlet, and it spread to the dining room by the time I got up. The only ways out were through the living room to the front door or through the dining room and kitchen to the back door. I used whatever strength I had to shove my headboard away from the window, broke the window out with my glass, and just screamed. My landlord was letting a guy illegally live in a storage room. He heard me and ran right down the block to the fire station. They actually got me through the window and then put out the fire. I was hours away from my family, had no money or ID, lost my cell phone and car keys in the fire, and it was only like 4 a.m. I ended up losing pretty much everything. My neighbor was nice enough to let me shower at her place and give me some clothes until my parents made the drive. If you told me, and my landlord was letting illegally live in a storage room, appeared in a story in this thread, I would not have guessed he was gonna be the hero. Sorry you went through that. Name one superhero that didn't do something illegal. Wait a minute. He's got a point. It wasn't me that noticed, something's not right. Once a woman came up to me on a train that I had gotten on and said, I just wanted you to know that man there is following you, and he was. He followed me, in a quiet way, when I changed trains, and I ended up asking a cop to walk me home. It was one of the creepiest experiences of my life. In hindsight, I shouldn't even have gone home. I'm pretty sure he stopped following me when I spoke with the police officer. But still. So for the future, if someone is following, in a car or otherwise, go straight to a police station. You can of course find ways to prove they are following you, taking 3 turns to go around the block / etc., but the best you can do is get some proof of who it is, covert selfie with them in it or license plate. You can also go to a place where you know there are surveillance cameras beforehand, then leave. However, all these steps won't guarantee your safety like going to the cops, so you have to trust your gut and make a judgment call. Solid advice. Very good advice. Unfortunately, the cop that walked me home found my social media later and asked me out. It wasn't bad or anything, he didn't bother me again after I said no, but it still left a sour taste in my mouth. Better than being followed home by a weirdo. Back when I was about 17 and invincible, I got tired of waiting for the bus on my way home from school and started hitchhiking. A scruffy-looking guy in a beat-up pickup truck pulled over and I got in. He wouldn't look directly at me, but had a kind of creepy smile on his face. I told him I needed to go straight down the street about 12 blocks, but about 6 blocks later he gets into a turn lane and puts on his turn signal. I finally realized something was up and my radar was going off like crazy. I saw some random guy on the street waiting at the crosswalk, so I started waving at him like crazy. Then I said, "Oh man, I'm in trouble now. That's my brother and he's going to be asking me who I was with in the truck." The random guy was looking at us strangely, probably trying to figure out who I was and why I was waving at him. The creepy guy's smile leaves his face and he turns off the turn signal. He drove straight down the street and I had him drop me off 3 blocks away from my home. I have no idea why it occurred to me to start waving at the guy, but I really think it saved me from some big trouble. When I was 10 years old, my grandma was watching my younger siblings and me while our parents were at a weekend-long work conference. We were sitting in the living room eating pancakes, and my siblings were watching cartoons while I read the newest Harry Potter book, which had just come out the day before. My brother asked my grandma for more pancakes and she started to get up. I was only half paying attention because I was engrossed in my book, but out of the corner of my eye, I felt like she was taking longer than usual. She tried to get up, but her leg wouldn't move. She tried to pick it up with her hands, but one of her hands wouldn't move. I knew something was wrong and I put down my book. Then she fell out of her chair onto the floor. I screamed and she tried to tell me that she was fine. Her leg had just fallen asleep and she tripped, but her voice was coming out all slurred and only half of her face was moving. I recognized signs of a stroke from the Babysitters Club. I ran into the kitchen, she had no cell phone back then, and called 911. Well, first I called my best friend, the only phone number I could remember, and asked her mom if I need to dial an area code before 911. Then I called 911. Meanwhile, my siblings got the handyman who was mowing the backyard to come in and help out. The ambulance arrived and they took her to the hospital, and I don't remember much else. My best friend's mom must have somehow gotten hold of my parents because they did eventually show up at the hospital. But here's the good news, because she was treated so quickly, she made a full recovery and is still alive and in good health almost 20 years later. The Babysitters Club. That killed me. I was about 13 or so years old and walking home from school along the railroad tracks. A police officer, in an unmarked Crown Vic in a suit and tie, stops on the adjoining road to yell and wave me down to him. Stupid kid me starts to comply with a cop. Next thing I know, a real cop pulls up behind him, gets out and approaches the man. He speaks to him a second and tells me to go home. Looking back, I was this close to becoming a child abduction case. Holy shit. A similar thing happened to my uncle's friend. This friend was arrested by a fake cop. He was found in a field, stabbed to death, the next day. I was sitting on the beach alone and noticed that a man walking along the water was staring at me. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe he had friends or family somewhere behind and wasn't actually looking at me. He started walking up from the water and walked right up to me, but didn't stop and circled around me. I felt awkward, so I didn't make eye contact. He walked away. I'm thinking at the time, maybe it was in my head. About an hour later, he came back and did the same thing. Went down to the water, looked at me, then started walking up to me. He came right up to me again, and as he starts to circle me, I look at him and notice he's staring not only at me but also at all of my things, like he was taking inventory of what I had with me. I finally said, "Can I help you?" And he seemed surprised that I spoke up and says, "Oh no, no, no," and walks away. After he walked away, I couldn't shake the uneasy gut feeling. They say when you know something is wrong, not to ignore your gut feeling. And I can't explain it, but I knew. I was too scared to walk back to my car alone, so I ended up walking over to another man nearby who had been keeping to himself and told him what had happened and that I just wanted someone to walk back to the parking lot with so I wouldn't have to walk back alone. He confirmed that the man was in fact totally watching me the entire time I was there. He noticed and said he saw him creeping around a couple other girls as well. That beach is ruined for me. As I walked back with the kind stranger, I still felt like I was being watched and I was paranoid my entire drive home. I'm so thankful for that kind stranger. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and if you feel like you're in danger, don't ignore that feeling. I have related this story before, but here goes. On a dark January night, I was driving a semi hauling two 20-foot trailers south on US 93 in Arizona, USA. This was another infamous highway in the US known as Head-On Highway. It was under construction, turning it from a 2-lane to a 4-lane divided highway. The speed limit was 55 miles per hour. Looking ahead, I saw the headlights of oncoming traffic coming down a hill with a right-hand curve at the bottom. In a flash, I realize something isn't right with the lead vehicle. In the next instance, it is clear they are on my side of the highway, and then damn, they are on my shoulder going north. My knee-jerk reaction is to steer left and avoid them. There is a double yellow line separating the north and southbound lanes. As I get close to the yellow lines, I swear I hear my father's voice ring in my ear, "You do not drive in their lane, do not drive in their lane." The thing is, my father was a union freight hauler with 2.5 million accident-free miles when he retired. Plus, he had passed away 11 years before this happened. By then I was off the throttle and feathering my brakes with my left foot, so I hugged those yellow lines on my side of the highway. The other driver saw he was headed for some big yellow crash barrels lined up at the end of a guardrail and swerved to get back on his side of the highway. When he did this, I was down to about 35 miles per hour with him somewhere around 65, according to the accident investigator, and he hit us in the driver's side steer tire. He knocked it of the axle and tore the fuel filter off the engine. We rolled a short distance and the hood popped open when we stopped, which let me see that the engine was on fire. I yelled at my co-driver, who had slept through the whole accident by the way, that we were on fire and had to get out. He flew out of the sleeper berth with his cowboy hat and clothes in hand. I jumped out of the cab and grabbed the fire extinguisher and sprayed it under the cab. I could see that the crossover fuel line had been displaced and diesel was flowing onto the spreading fire. I threw the extinguisher away, reached into the cab and grabbed my coat, our log books and the bill of lading. We were hauling a placarded load with flammable materials. Meanwhile, the other vehicle had come to a stop some 100 feet or so past us. When DPS, Arizona Department of Public Safety, arrived, they found a case of beer bottles on the floor of their back seat with half of them empty and shut the scene down as a crime scene, drunk driving. It took fire and rescue an hour to cut the roof off and extract the driver, who had suffered a broken leg. His brother was in the jump seat and had a broken arm. Our tractor and front trailer burned to the ground. I will never forget the sound of the tires on our tractor exploding due to the fire. 110 psi makes a hell of a racket when it goes off. A couple of months later, I received a letter of commendation from DPS with the accident investigator telling me the two brothers probably owed their lives to the way I handled the accident. It all happened in a flash, but I still get emotional about it 16 years later. Edit, fixed moths to months. I got home from work, and as soon as I stepped out of my car, something felt off. My upstairs neighbor left his dog out, which wasn't super uncommon, but she was acting strange, which just added to my weird intuition. Normally she's super excited to greet you, but this time she just sat by his door. About 20 minutes pass and I can't shake the feeling. I decide to go to his door and see if he wants to come down for a drink. As I approach, I notice his dog made it inside, but now she's barking nonstop. I knock until I'm pounding on his door. I jiggle the handle and it's locked. I run down and through my house to a back stairwell that connects our residences. I open the door to his apartment and he's overdosing on Percocet, convulsing on the ground, struggling to breathe. EMS said if they had been called 10 minutes later he might not have survived. Edit, didn't think this would get much attention. So here's a bonus story. I moved into the house where this happened about 2 years ago. In the same upstairs residence there was an older gentleman who lived there before my buddy and his dog. Roughly 3 weeks after moving in, I stopped seeing my elderly neighbor. He was a bit of a homebody, didn't have internet or even a smartphone, very simple guy who just enjoyed the company of some scotch and his blues records. Weeks go by and I notice he hasn't been playing his records and it's been awfully quiet, but I didn't think much of this because I wasn't well acquainted with the guy, so I didn't really know his schedule/habits. Around week 3 or 4, this foul stench starts to creep throughout my home. I light candles, I hose my house with Febreze to no avail. One day I come home and the smell is unbearable, and then it hits me. This is the smell of a dead body. I call my landlord, who comes over in a hurry. As soon as he is introduced to the smell he goes white. We rush to his front door, which he unlocks considering this to be extreme circumstances, and sure enough my former neighbor is dead, rotting on the floor. He had been there for so long his blood had soaked into the floor and was seeping into my bathroom ceiling. You could see it inside the light fixtures. Dogs know when things aren't right. My dog was the one who alerted me to my detached garage being on fire. He also catches onto arguments in the neighborhood, and gets upset if things start to escalate, which usually cues me to call 911, and that has gotten abusers arrested, and prevented major vandalism sprees. Every time my dog is acting off, I pay very close attention, because usually he's right. When I was about 19, I was waiting for my then boyfriend to get off of work at the mall, standing outside near the employee entrance. It was close to 10 p.m. and the mall had already closed, so the parking lot was fairly empty. This car drove up to the curb, probably 15 feet from where I was standing at the wall, and the window rolled down. The driver was the only person in the car, and he asked if I knew how to get to X road. That road was the one visible from where I was standing, so I pointed at it and told him the exit onto that road was right across the way. He kept looking at me and said, "I'm having trouble hearing you." So I walked 5 feet closer and shouted it at him. He said, "Could you show me?" I'm terrible with directions. I immediately decided this man just wanted me to either get close enough to grab or to get into his car, and just pointed to the road and said, "Drive that way, you can't miss it," and walked right into the employee entrance to wait for my boyfriend instead. I wasn't supposed to be in there, but figured getting yelled at by security was way better than getting kidnapped by a guy in his 40s. I video called my sister an hour after she had a baby. She picked up and just said, "I don't feel good," but something was bone-chillingly off about it. An hour later she was hemorrhaging and all her stats were in a free fall. Turns out she had a major complication that the doctors missed. The scariest time of my life. She spent 3 weeks in ICU but eventually made a full recovery, and the baby was healthy and is currently climbing on me as we enjoy Christmas together. That was 2 years ago, but I still remember the exact look in her eye when she said, "I don't feel good." Gives me chills even today. A sense of impending doom is an actual medical symptom that can indicate hemorrhage, heart attack, and a few other things. EMTs are trained that if a patient says something like this, there is something very wrong, you just can't see it yet. I'm glad your sister pulled through. I had just parked my car at work and had gotten out and was walking around to my trunk when I noticed a jogger in the parking lot I didn't recognize. Before and after work we see quite a few people jogging/walking from the other businesses in the office park, so it's not an unusual sight. But this guy made me feel like I shouldn't turn my back to him for some reason. He wasn't acting off or anything to make me feel that way at all. So I'm now digging through my trunk and my lunch has rolled to the back and my little stubby arms can't reach it from standing, and I know I'll have to lean way into my trunk to get it. I start to lean and I'm still watching the jogger out of the corner of my eye and see him stop jogging and start sneaking along the line of cars leading to mine. In hindsight, I should have slammed my trunk shut and sprinted for the front door. What I did was square up and face the direction he was coming from and yell, "Good morning. Can I help you?" when he slunk around the SUV next to my car. He was surprised and turned and hauled us away. A second later, one of the managers came barreling out the front door towards me yelling for me to get inside, "There's a predator in the parking lot." We never saw the dude again, but I made sure everyone was on the lookout for him. I know better than to play on my phone in parking lots. Who knows what would have happened if I'd been distracted. Would the manager have made it outside in time? I think about it time to time, even though it's been like 6 years or so. Our work parking lot is very safe. I've never even heard of someone having stuff stolen out of their unlocked cars. It took a long time for it to feel safe again. How did your manager know something was up though? His office has windows facing the parking lot and he said he glanced out the window and saw the guy start to sneak around the cars. He made it out just after the guy ran off. I was about 16 to 17. Driving back to my place from a 7-Eleven in my mom's car with a friend. The streets were deserted as it was middle of the night around 2 a.m. We pulled up to this stoplight, and a motorcycle with a pillion on the back pulled up unnecessarily close to our car's passenger side window. I had a bad feeling but ultimately did nothing and proceeded to chat with my friend while waiting for the green light. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the pillion pulling a rod or hammer from his backpack and starts to wind up. I peeled the fuck out of there real fast, LMAO. Managed to lose the bike and got home safe. Friend didn't even know what was going on until we reached my place. I was home alone and someone rang my bell door. It was dark and I could see a person, but I was unable to see his face, only like a shadow. I didn't open the door because he never answered, so I went back to playing. However, my dog would look straight at the door like he knows something was not right. After like 2 hours, my parents arrived and told me there are 2 police cars on our street. Apparently, that person was a burglar and he knocked out one of my neighbors and stole from his house. This happened 2 years ago, but I still feel unsafe because I am probably the only one that was able to see his face. Summer before graduating high school, I was home alone because my family went to go camping and I had to work. I decided to mow the lawn as it was one of my chores and it needed to get done. Shortly after starting, I felt a sharp pain on my ankle and realized I'd been stung by a wasp/yellow jacket. I'd been stung before and never had problems, but I didn't want to mow over the entire nest, so I moved to the front of the house and called my dad and jokingly told him to clear them out when he got home. As soon as I got off the phone, I felt an itch on the palm of my hands and I started to feel dread. The itch escalated to ridiculous light sensitivity that I basically had my eyes squeezed shut and I began to panic. I started to try to make my way to my neighbor's house, but halfway there I collapsed. I was breathing fine, but it felt like I had no energy. I was able to crawl to their door and ring the doorbell. They let me in and right before blacking out I, apparently, said, "There might be bees outside." I woke up to paramedics trying to get me to wake up. Once I did, they asked if I could walk. I was able to stand, but I blacked out again as soon as I took a step. Apparently it was a combination of anaphylactic, spelling, shock and dehydration. I've never felt that way before. I assumed everyone just got itchy spots or their throats closed up, but I didn't have that at all. My blood pressure plummeted and my neighbors said I looked like a ghost, lost blood in all my extremities or something. I was also told that 5 more minutes and I wouldn't have made it. I was age 4 and with my parents in town on a very busy market day when I suddenly got lost and separated from my parents in the crowd. I quickly felt very disorientated and started walking around in circles and sobbing that I had lost my mom and dad, when this tall man approached me and told me that he would help me find my parents. He then said that I should come with him to his van that was parked a street away, telling me that he could drive me around to help me find my parents. Nothing about him made sense to me, and so I told him that I should stay where I was. He then started getting more pushy and short with me, trying to persuade me harder to go with him. I was terribly naive, but I was instinctively scared and distrustful of him. It was just as he went for my hand that my dad and mom suddenly found me. My parents had been freaking out trying to find me that they didn't even notice the strange man I was with, but the second he saw them he melted into the crowds and disappeared. I hate to think what my fate would have been if I had been a little more gullible or trusting. Isn't it amazing how an experience like that can stick with you for life? I have a similar memory my parents have verified, and when I reflect on it I'm amazed I remember anything from that age, let alone so vividly.